They found my first husband dead in silk sheets at dawn. His eyes were open, his mouth a hard O, like he was still bargaining with God. In the kitchen, the porcelain cup slipped from my hand and shattered, not from grief, from relief. A chain inside me snapped, and the silence after was loud as a bell. They will call me monster, temptress, witch. Count with them if you like. 7 husbands, 7 deaths, 7 fortunes. In New Orleans, numbers have shadows. Money smells like sugar and blood. Candles spit, walls listen, and every whisper walks the streets at night. I learned the city's secret. Power hides in plain sight, smiling. I was bought like furniture, dressed like a lady, and handled like a tool. Men thought beauty made me soft. They were wrong. Beauty is a blade when you hold it right. Mine cut quiet, drop by drop, until strong men folded like paper birds in rain. If you believe the dead still speak in this city, subscribe and comment your state below. Tell me where you're watching from, and ask yourself what justice tastes like. Coffee, sweet and dark, or medicine, bitter and final. The cup is still warm. Footsteps are running. The house holds its breath. Before this is over, 7 rings will lie in a velvet box, and 7 graves will cool in the shade of live oaks. Listen to the hinges of history turning. Tell me, was I born cruel, or did your world teach me? I was born in the heat of a Louisiana summer, where even the air seemed heavy with someone else's ownership. My mother was a house slave, quiet, graceful, and careful never to look a white man directly in the eye. My father was the man who owned her. He called me Delilah, though I was never his daughter in the way white daughters are known. I was his property, a living reminder of his sin, and from the moment I took my first breath, I belonged to someone else. By the time I was 10, I could read my master's moods better than books. The way his jaw set when he was angry, the way he loosened his collar before a beating. Plantation life taught me that silence was survival, and that beauty, even in a child, could be dangerous. My skin was café au lait, my hair the color of spun gold. Enough European blood to be valuable, but not enough to be free. When he died, the debtors came like vultures. They sold the land, the cattle, the sugar, and us. At 18, I stood on the auction block in New Orleans. My wrists gloved so buyers wouldn't see the tremble beneath my calm. Men in fine coats lifted their bidding paddles like it was sport. One of them, Pierre Dubois, watched me with a look that made my stomach turn. When the gavel fell, he smiled. 2,500, that was my price. I was bought like a necklace. Expensive, delicate, expected to shine on command. Pierre owned a mansion on Royal Street, tall iron balconies, silk drapes, chandeliers that hummed with heat. When I first stepped inside, I thought maybe, just maybe, this was freedom in disguise. But the walls smelled of perfume and power. And I soon understood the truth. Gilded cages are still cages. Pierre had a habit of calling me his housekeeper in public and his pet in private. At night, his footsteps in the hall made my heart pound, not from love, but from the dread of what love meant to men like him. Some nights, I'd stand by the mirror and whisper, "You are not his," but mirrors lie. They only show what the world allows you to see. Still, a seed was growing somewhere beneath the obedience and the fear, a thought too dangerous to speak aloud. What if the master could die and the slave could live free? Outside, the bells of St. Louis Cathedral tolled midnight. Inside, Pierre slept with his hand across my waist as if I were property even in dreams. I stared into the dark and made a silent promise to myself. One day, he would sleep that way forever. 1833 Louisiana. Heat, chains, and a young woman priced like silk. If beauty were your only weapon, would you use it to kill? Pierre Dubois liked to say that his house was a piece of France refined by the tropics. To me, it was a theater where cruelty wore velvet gloves. From the street, his mansion shimmered. Iron balconies blooming with flowers, chandeliers spilling gold light onto the marble floors. Inside, it was always too quiet, as if the walls were listening for the next command. He gave me rooms of my own on the second floor, silk wallpaper, a canopy bed, perfume bottles lined like jewels. A paradise for a prisoner. Each morning I polished the furniture that had more worth than my life. Each night I learned the rhythm of his footsteps, the sound of the key turning in my door. Pierre was not a man of love, only possession. He liked his food sweet and his punishments sudden. If a servant broke a glass, he'd make them kneel on salt until blood stained the floor. If I hesitated when he spoke, his voice would rise, not loud but sharp, like the crack of a whip in miniature. He told me once, "You are lucky, Delilah. I've made you my companion. You could be out there in the fields, burned black by the sun." I smiled because smiling kept me alive. Inside, I thought, at least in the fields I could run. The nights were worst. He'd drink cognac until his words slurred into threats. Sometimes he'd force me to sit at the piano, play soft music while he ranted about his business and the world that owed him obedience. His world, the one where men like him were gods and women like me were made to worship. When he tired, he'd drag me to his bed and whisper, "My perfect possession." Those words became my ghosts. They followed me even in dreams. Months turned to years. I grew quiet, graceful, what he called well-trained. But something inside me was changing. I studied him. The way he rubbed his chest after heavy meals. The faint tremor in his hands when he drank too much. The pills he took for his nerves. I stored every detail like a thief memorizing a map. Once, while cleaning his study, I found a drawer of contracts, sales, loans, and receipts from the slave market. My name was there, listed between 2 sugar crates. One female house servant, mixed blood, aged 18, sound teeth. I stared at the words until they blurred, and something inside me hardened into steel. That night, he struck me for serving his wine too warm. My lips split. Blood touched my tongue, and I remember thinking, it tastes like metal, like the cage I was born in. The next morning, I walked through the market with my shawl pulled low. Among the sellers of herbs and charms, I saw her, a woman with eyes like midnight and a voice like prophecy. Marie Laveau, the voodoo queen. She looked at me once and said, "Child, you're living in a cage too fine to see." But every cage has a key. I didn't answer her, but I carried her words home, folded like a secret between my ribs. Pierre was still alive that night, but the walls of his palace already felt different, lighter, like they knew he wouldn't haunt them forever. Royal Street, New Orleans. A house lit with candles and screams. How long can a slave pretend to be a wife? I found her again 3 weeks later, at the edge of the French market, where the air smelled of spice and secrets. Marie Laveau didn't call out to me. She didn't have to. Her eyes caught mine the way a snake catches a bird's. Calm, patient, unblinking. She sat beneath a faded parasol, selling herbs wrapped in brown paper and tiny vials of oil that shimmered gold in the sunlight. Around her neck hung a rosary made of bone, and when she spoke, her voice felt older than the river itself. "You've been carrying a storm, child," she said without looking up. "I can hear it in your silence." I wanted to deny it, but my throat refused. "You don't know me," I whispered. Marie smiled, slow and knowing. "I know what a cage sounds like when it rattles." For the first time in years, someone saw me, not as a possession, not as a body to command, but as a soul locked behind glass. I went back to her again and again under the excuse of buying spices for the kitchen. She taught me which plants healed and which killed, which prayers could protect, and which could curse. "Men like your master," she told me one afternoon, her fingers tracing symbols into a bowl of salt, "believe their power makes them safe. But power makes men careless, and careless men are easy to kill." She said it so softly I almost didn't believe she meant it. But when she looked at me again, her expression held no mercy. Marie taught me to listen, to the creak of doors, to the rhythm of breathing, to the pauses between words. "You must study him," she said. "Every habit, every indulgence. Let him believe he still holds the leash. That's how you teach the snake to bite its own hand." Some nights she let me stay while she worked. Women came to her for charms, potions, and sometimes vengeance. One arrived bruised and shaking, her husband's name trembling on her lips. Marie gave her a small vial of clear liquid and whispered, "2 drops in his tea, and you'll never fear him again." That night I couldn't sleep. I stared at Pierre beside me, his face slack in drunken dreams, his breath thick with brandy, and I thought of that vial. How easy it would be. 2 drops, freedom, silence. Marie never told me directly to kill him. She didn't have to. She only gave me the tools, the choice, and a warning. Once you cross that line, she said, you can't uncross it. You'll carry the echo forever. I looked her in the eyes and said, the echo is already here. The following week, she handed me a bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside lay crushed oleander leaves in a small jar of oil, sweet-smelling, deadly. Pretty things can hide poison, she said. Remember that. As I walked home through the quarter, the church bells were ringing, the sound mixed with the heartbeat in my ears. I felt fear, yes, but under it something stronger. Purpose. That night, I placed the jar beside Pierre's coffee pot. My hands didn't shake. Not anymore. Anchor, French Market, 1835. Candles, incense, and a deal with darkness. Question. Is knowledge sin if it saves a slave? The morning he died, the sky over New Orleans looked clean, almost innocent, as if it wanted no part in what was coming. The air was heavy with sugar and rot, the kind of heat that made even God sweat. Pierre had beaten me the night before. He'd accused me of stealing from his study, when all I'd done was exist in a room he believed too fine for me. The bruise on my shoulder pulsed like a drum under my dress as I stirred his morning coffee. Just a pinch, Marie had said, no more than a sigh. The crushed oleander blended into the dark liquid like a secret swallowed whole. Tasteless, odorless, patient. Pierre stumbled into the parlor wearing his robe, his face flushed from drink and pride. You look pale this morning, Delilah, he said, pouring himself the coffee I'd prepared. You should be grateful for your comfort. Some women would kill for this life. Some women would, I thought. He took a long sip, smacked his lips, and went on about his business. Shipments, profits, his superiority over the world. I smiled when he told me to fetch his papers, and my heart didn't race. It waited. By noon, the storm inside him began to break. His hand went to his chest. The spoon fell, clattering like a bell for judgment. He gasped, eyes wide, as if he'd seen someone familiar waiting for him on the other side. I screamed for the servants just as any faithful housekeeper should. By the time the doctor arrived, Pierre was lying still, his lips gray, his heart stilled by natural causes. Heat stroke, the doctor muttered, wiping his brow. Or a weak heart. These things happen in this climate. I nodded, eyes wet with tears that didn't belong to grief. That night, the mansion was silent. The air no longer hummed with his commands. I walked through every room barefoot, feeling the cool marble under my feet like new skin. When I reached his study, I opened the drawer that once held my sale receipt, my worth written in ink. I burned it in the candle flame, watching the numbers curl into ash. 3 days later, his lawyer came to deliver Pierre's will. I expected chains to find me again, for another man to claim what was left of his property. Instead, the lawyer cleared his throat and read, to my housekeeper, Delilah, who has served me faithfully, I grant $5,000 and her complete freedom. $5,000. Freedom. The words hit harder than any blow Pierre had ever struck. I wasn't furniture anymore. I was a woman with money, a name and no master. That night I sat by the open window, the scent of magnolia drifting through the dark, and whispered to the stars. He thought he owned me. But I own his silence now. For the first time in my life, the air didn't feel borrowed. It felt earned. Anchor, 1835, 1 cup of coffee. One dead master. Question. If freedom cost a life, would you pay it? Freedom was supposed to feel like air. But in New Orleans, even freedom came perfumed. Sweet, heavy, and watched. By 1836, people no longer whispered slave when they saw me. They whispered widow. With Pierre's $5,000, I bought a small home in the Faubourg Marigny. White shutters, green vines curling up the walls. I wore lace gloves and carried myself like a woman who had always been free. In a city built on lies, it was easy to invent a new truth. His name was Jean-Baptiste Laurent, a merchant with a mouthful of compliments and hands that smelled like ink and tobacco. He courted me as if I were a prize he'd discovered at auction, rare, refined, and profitable. You have the manners of a lady, he told me, and the look of fortune itself. He meant it as praise. I took it as a warning. We married that August. The papers called it a triumph, a respectable union between a successful merchant and a woman of fine breeding. He moved into my house, brought his ledgers, his liquor, and his arrogance. Within weeks, he took control of my finances, "Let me handle the accounts," he said. "Numbers are a man's work. Soon my money was our money, my home our investment, my silence his right." But unlike Pierre, Jean-Baptiste did not raise his hand. He raised his tone. Each insult was dipped in sugar. "You don't understand business. You're too delicate for such things." Every word was a reminder that I was a painting hanging in his office, something beautiful. Silent and framed by his control, I played my part well, smiled when he called me foolish, blushed when his friends admired me. All the while I watched him. The way his appetite swelled when he drank, the nights he forgot to lock his cabinet of wine, the way he never noticed if I added something new to his cup. Marie Laveau had warned me. Patience is the deadliest poison of all. I remembered. I began with the smallest dusting, arsenic ground so fine it vanished in red wine. He'd sip, sigh, and complain of headaches. "Too much work," he'd say. "Too much heat." By the third month, his hair began to thin, his skin turned sallow. He thought it was the swamp fever sweeping the city. I thought it was justice ripening. When he finally took to bed, pale and trembling, neighbors praised me for my devotion. "You're an angel, Delilah," they said. "So loyal to your poor husband." I held his hand through every gasp, whispered comfort as his breathing slowed. When he finally stilled, I pressed my palm over his mouth. Not to silence him, but to feel the life leaving, soft and certain. The doctor called it disease. The city called it tragedy. I called it lesson number 2. When the lawyer finished his paperwork, I found myself worth $12,000, more money than most white families would ever touch. That night, I poured myself a glass of his finest wine, stared into its red reflection, and whispered, "Two down." Outside, thunder rolled over the river. Inside, my laughter sounded like breaking glass. Anchor, 1839, yellow fever, or the widow's touch. Question: would you smile at a killer in morning black? By 1840, the people of New Orleans called me fortunate. 6 years free, twice widowed, never wanting for anything. They saw lace gloves, a polished carriage, Sunday church attendance. They didn't see the silence that followed me down every street, or the list of names that had already begun in my head. His name was Armand Rousseau, a sugar planter from St. Bernard Parish. 60 years old, wealthy and diabetic, though in those days they simply called it the sugar sickness. He wore gold rings and smelled faintly of molasses. He courted me with tenderness, the way an old man courts youth, cautiously, with coins. "You have a kind heart, Madame Dubois," he said, taking my hand one evening at the theater. "You remind me that life can be sweet again." I smiled. "Too much sweetness can kill, monsieur," he laughed. He should not have. When he proposed, I accepted. The marriage was respectable, elegant, and predictable. Society adored it. The gentle Creole widow and the kind old planter. They said I was blessed with good fortune. I knew better. I was blessed with practice. Armand was not cruel. That almost made it worse. He treated me as a nurse, not a wife. Fragile, distant, and endlessly obedient. Each morning I measured his sugar levels, prepared his meals, and whispered gentle scoldings when he reached for candy. He'd wink and say, "You'll keep me alive forever." I'd smile and reply, "I promise," Marie Laveau once told me. The deadliest lies are told with a kiss, and so I lied sweetly. I began altering his meals, tiny, careful steps. His porridge became a little richer, his tea a little sweeter. Then came the drops, just a trace of what Marie called the night's dust, a compound meant to strain the blood, to blur the heart's rhythm. Armand's decline was slow, poetic almost. His skin grew pale as sugar dust. His breath rattled softly at night, like a candle guttering in wind. He thanked me often for my care. "You've been a blessing, Delilah," he said, gripping my hand. "You've given me peace." "Rest, my love," I whispered. "Rest deeply." When he died in March of 1842, they said it was inevitable. The doctor praised my devotion. The newspapers mourned a man loved deeply by his angelic wife. Angel, that word again. It burned more than hellfire. Armand left me $25,000 in part ownership of his sugar holdings, enough to buy land, property, freedom, and silence. I was no longer the shadow of a man's name. I was a power in my own right. But it wasn't the money that mattered most. It was what I began to do with it. Marie helped me channel it quietly, to buy the freedom of others. A woman here. A boy there. Bit by bit, the blood money turned into liberation. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. I killed men who sold sugar, and I used their sugar fortunes to free the enslaved. By then, I had learned the truth. Vengeance doesn't always roar. Sometimes it hums slow and sweet, beneath the sound of a silver spoon. That night, I walked the edge of Armand's fields, the moonlight pooling in the cane. The air smelled of syrup and ghosts. I thought of the first cup of poisoned coffee, of Pierre's last breath, of every woman still locked in her cage, and I whispered to the dark, 3 down, anchor 1842, sugar rotting on the tongue. Love tasting like death. Question, when kindness kills, who's to blame? Between 1843 and 1851, I became what New Orleans society loved most. A story they could not stop retelling. 6 funerals, 6 black veils, and 1 mysterious widow, whose tears always dried too quickly. They called me blessed by misfortune. They never called me what I was, deliberate. My house on Dauphine Street became a place of whispers. Men visited, women stared, and the priests prayed for my soul in hushed tones. I hosted luncheons, charities, and candlelit dinners where silver gleamed and laughter masked the ghosts. Each meal, each toast, each smile, another test of patience, another performance. The city called me beautiful. The truth? I was patient. My next 3 husbands arrived like chapters in a book that wrote itself. Claude Fontaine, the banker who saw money as oxygen. Henri Beaumont, the importer who called me his lucky charm. Louis Marand, the gambler who thought charm could replace wisdom. Each one believed he had discovered something rare, a gentle, loyal widow who brought elegance to their aging lives. Each one died within 3 years of meeting me. Claude choked on ambition, and a dinner laced with white arsenic dust. Henri drank himself into the grave, never realizing the wine glass he loved was his coffin. Louis fell to what the doctor called a seizure of the blood. Marie called it clever work. But by then my crimes were more than personal. They were strategic. For every husband who fell, a dozen lives rose. Marie and I kept meticulous records, the names of those we freed, the sums spent to buy their liberty. She called it our quiet rebellion. I called it balance. We bought freedom papers through whispers and shadow deals. A mother in Baton Rouge, 2 brothers from Plaquemines. A girl barely 12 sold twice in 1 year. Each one freed with a signature paid for in the blood of a man who had believed himself untouchable. At night, I'd sit by candlelight, tracing the names of those freed. 125 lives by the time I turned 40. Every stroke of the pen felt like confession and prayer all at once. But even angels of vengeance grow weary. The mirror showed new lines around my eyes. Men still came to call, drawn to my fortune, not my fading beauty. The world had taught me that the two were the same currency. Marie warned me softly. The dead talk, Delilah. The city remembers patterns. I shrugged. Then let them talk. They'll call it luck before they ever call it justice. Still, something inside me began to ache. Not guilt, but fatigue. Freedom, it seemed, had its own chains. By 1851, I was one of the wealthiest women of color in Louisiana. My houses stretched from Royal Street to Esplanade Avenue. My dresses were Paris silk, my name on everyone's lips. But there was one whisper that traveled faster than perfume. Every man she marries dies. I ignored it, until I met the man who would make it prophecy. He came to me with eyes too sharp, questions too measured, and hands that never shook. His name was Antoine Chevalier, and for the first time in years, I felt something that was not confidence. I felt hunted. Anchor. 1843, 1851. 3 weddings. 3 funerals, no tears. Question, does blood wash clean when spent on freedom? He found me before I ever planned to find him. Antoine Chevalier, a cotton broker whose fortune stretched across parishes and whose eyes missed nothing. He was 62, lean as a cane stalk, and carried the silence of a man who thought before he breathed. When he looked at me, it wasn't admiration I saw. It was calculation. At a charity auction that autumn, he offered a ridiculous sum for a painting I'd donated. A fair price, he said, for something beautiful that hides its cost. It wasn't flirtation. It was a test. People whispered about me openly now. 6 husbands, 6 graves, 6 inheritances. They called me lucky, though their eyes said cursed. Antoine listened to those whispers too, but instead of recoiling, he seemed intrigued. He came calling with questions instead of compliments. "You've known great misfortune," he said, settling in my parlor one afternoon, "and great gain. Tell me, how does one survive such odds?" "Grace," I replied with a smile. "And prayer." He watched my face too long to believe it. "Grace," he repeated, tasting the word like poison he meant to identify later. He courted me not with gifts but with scrutiny. When he held my hand, I could almost hear the arithmetic in his mind. Risk versus reward. Still, he proposed, and I accepted, because Antoine represented more than another fortune. He was challenge, closure, proof that even suspicion could be seduced. Our wedding was small, quiet, unromantic. The papers called it a union of refinement. I called it an experiment. From the start, he locked his ledgers, kept his meals under his own watch, and refused wine I poured. "My stomach is delicate," he said with a smile that never reached his eyes. "I must prepare my food myself." He hired a physician, Dr. Roussel, to visit weekly. He even tested his drinking water. I almost admired him. He studied me constantly. How long I lingered by his desk when I touched his shoulder. What I served the servants before his plate. Once, when I brushed a crumb from his sleeve, he flinched like I'd pressed a knife to his throat. "The past follows people like us," he said one night as rain battered the shutters. "Sometimes it arrives disguised as company." "And sometimes," I replied. "The past dies of natural causes," he laughed then, a quiet, knowing sound that unsettled me more than any accusation. For weeks, I tried to find a weakness, a bottle left open, a dish unwatched, a moment of trust. None appeared. Antoine was fortress and shadow both. So I adapted. I learned new poisons, ones that needed no cup, no plate. Venoms that could slip through the skin, through the smallest cut, through air thick with humidity and secrets. When Marie heard my plan, she frowned. "He's clever," she warned. "He's already built your gallows in his mind." "Then let him," I said. "I'll build mine higher." By winter's end, I'd become two women. The attentive wife reading scripture by candlelight, and the serpent learning patience once more. Every word, every glance between us was a duel waged beneath smiles. Antoine once told me, "You are the only woman in Louisiana who makes me feel unsafe." I smiled softly. Then I'm finally honest. The house on Esplanade was silent that night, except for the ticking of his clock and the sound of two predators breathing in the dark, each waiting for the other to blink first. Anchor, 1852. A marriage signed in ink and fear. Question: who wins when both players are poison? The plan came to me the way a storm comes to the Gulf, slow, dark, and certain. Marie Laveau's words echoed in my mind. If the cup won't take the poison, the skin will. Antoine had built a fortress of suspicion. He prepared every meal himself, sealed his study drawers, even dismissed servants for brushing too near his glass. I had never known a man so careful, but I had also never known a man so proud. Pride, Marie always said, is the softest part of the armor. Antoine's pride was his health. He prided himself on his long walks by the river, his invincible constitution, his belief that he could master even age itself. So I used his strength against him. One evening in February 1853, as he dressed for a meeting at the Cotton Exchange, I offered to polish his boots, a gesture of wifely devotion he could hardly refuse. He smiled faintly, suspicious but flattered. "You surprise me, Delilah," he said. "A woman of your refinement polishing a man's shoes?" "Even kings need clean steps," I replied. The polish, thick and dark, gleamed under the lamplight. No one would notice the faint powder I mixed into it, a venom Marie had taught me to draw from the swamps. Its effect was mercifully precise, paralysis, then silence, then nothing. It left no trace, only the illusion of a sudden stroke. The next morning, Antoine stumbled through his breakfast routine as if half his soul had stayed asleep. "Strange," he murmured, rubbing his temple. My arm feels he never finished the sentence. His teacup slipped, shattering like the memory of every man before him. He gasped, clutched his chest, and fell to the floor. I screamed, summoning the servants, my voice the perfect pitch of panic. When Dr. Roussel arrived, he pressed his stethoscope to Antoine's chest, his expression grave. A stroke, he declared. Massive. There is nothing to be done. I wept on cue, my tears falling in time with the clock. But inside, the calm that filled me was colder than any grief. Within 3 days, Antoine Chevalier, the man who had outguessed every rival and outlived every enemy, was dead. The city mourned him as a titan of commerce. They called me his devoted widow, the woman who had tended his final days. For the first time, my victory did not taste like triumph. There was a tremor under it, the uneasy rhythm of something unfinished. 3 nights after the funeral, as the lamps burned low, a knock came at the door. Detective Marcel Roussel stood there, a man built from precision and suspicion, holding a letter sealed in black wax. "It's from your husband's attorney," he said, "to be opened in the event of his sudden death." The seal broke with a soft crack that sounded like the beginning of a sentence I would not like the ending of. Inside were Antoine's final words, written in his careful hand. "If you are reading this, I am gone. And if I am gone, it was not by chance. Search the graves of my predecessors. You will find what the city whispers but will not say." The detective folded the letter, eyes narrowing as they met mine. "Madame Chevalier," he said, voice like stone, "I believe we should talk." And just like that, the silence I'd purchased with 7 deaths began to tremble. Anchor, 1853. A stroke in the ledger. A trap in the will. Question, can the dead still accuse the living? They came for me at dawn. The knock wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. The whole city already knew. By the time I reached the carriage steps, half of Royal Street was watching. Women pressed handkerchiefs to their mouths. Men whispered into newspapers. "The Black Widow," they murmured. "The poisonous widow of New Orleans." Detective Marcel Roussel sat across from me in the carriage, his gloves spotless, his expression carved from patience. "Your husband was careful," he said softly. "He left quite the record." "Antoine was a careful man," I replied. "Careful men often die surprised." He didn't smile. "And yet, madame, you will find that careful men sometimes speak after death." They locked me in a cold cell beneath the parish courthouse. The walls smelled of lime and iron, old ghosts. 3 days later, the trial began. The courtroom was overflowing. The city hadn't seen such spectacle since the last duel between gentlemen. I stood in black silk, the same color I had worn to every funeral before. Across from me sat Charles Gaillard, the prosecutor, a man who enjoyed the sound of his own righteousness. "Gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice swelling, "this woman stands accused of murdering 7 men. 7, each wealthier than the last, each dying within years of her affection. Coincidence? No, a pattern. A profession. He laid out my life like evidence at an altar. Pierre Dubois, heart failure. Jean-Baptiste Laurent, swamp fever. Armand Rousseau, diabetic collapse. Claude Fontaine, food poisoning. Henri Beaumont, alcohol delirium. Louis Morand, stroke. Antoine Chevalier, another stroke. 7 husbands, he said, and not one widow's tear that did not glitter with profit. The jury stared at me as though they were already burying me. My lawyer, Maître Beauregard, rose with polite confidence. "Suspicion," he said, "is not proof. Coincidence is not crime. Madame Chevalier has merely suffered misfortune. A woman cursed by loss, not guilt." But then came the evidence Antoine had left behind. Letters, notes, precise accounts of his fears. And the exhumations, Dr. Mercier, the city's best physician, testified that traces of arsenic, oleander, and serpent venom were found in the bodies of 3 husbands. The crowd gasped. The courtroom became a theater of horror, each sentence a drumbeat leading to the gallows. I watched them all, doctors, servants, acquaintances, each repeating their version of my story, each rewriting my silence into guilt. But what chilled me most was how calmly I sat. It was as if I were watching another woman's trial. Perhaps I was. On the 6th day, I asked the judge to let me speak. My lawyer begged me not to. I stood anyway. "My lords," I began, my voice clear and low, "they have told you how these men died. Let me tell you why." The courtroom went still. "I was born a slave," I said, "sold at 18 to a man who called me his housekeeper. He bought me for my skin, used me for his comfort, and beat me when I spoke. I killed him, and for the first time in my life I could breathe. Gasps, murmurs. The judge's gavel struck once, twice to restore order. I did not kill for greed, I continued. I killed because every man who claimed to own me was a link in the same chain. When I took their money, I used it to buy freedom for others like me. 125 souls who now walk free because 7 monsters sleep beneath marble. The prosecutor rose, red with fury. You admit to murder? I admit to justice, I answered. The kind your laws never offered us. Silence followed, thick and holy. For one heartbeat, I saw doubt flicker even in the judge's eyes. Then the gavel came down. The jury deliberated less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. As they read the verdict, I lifted my chin. Tell your papers, I said, that I was never a widow. I was an executioner. Anchor Courtroom, New Orleans. 7 coffins. 1 truth. Question, if sin buys salvation, what is it worth? The cell they gave me was small enough to fit my entire life inside. Bare walls, 1 straw mattress, a rusted bucket, and a single barred window that faced nothing but sky. The smell of mildew clung to my dress. Every morning, the jailer slid me a bowl of cornmeal and water, as if feeding a ghost that refused to die. I counted time by the footsteps in the hall. 12 steps a key turning, 12 steps back. That was how I measured days now. At first I expected despair, but what came instead was silence. And in that silence I found something that had never existed in any of my mansions. Peace. For the first time in 20 years I had nothing to hide and no one to deceive. Visitors came. They always came. The first was Samuel, an old man with kind eyes and calloused hands. He removed his hat when he spoke. You don't know me, ma'am, he said softly. But my wife and we're free because of you. They told us what you did with the money. I stared at his trembling fingers, the roughness of skin earned from years in the fields. I didn't do it for gratitude, I said. I know, he whispered. But we thank you anyway. He left a small wooden cross by my bed. I never prayed to it, but I couldn't throw it away. Later came a young woman named Rose, no older than I had been when I was sold. You bought my mother's freedom, she told me, voice quivering. She told me to tell you that her children will never taste the whip. I nodded. Then the blood was worth it. Each night I wrote their names in my mind, Samuel, Rose, their families, their futures. 125 lives. It didn't redeem me, but it explained me. The priest came too. Father Dominique, white-haired and weary, his faith worn thin like old lace. Child, he said, you still have time to ask for forgiveness. I smiled faintly. Forgiveness for what? For killing the men who believed they could own me? For taking life, no matter the reason, he said gently. Murder is a sin, even when done by the broken. I turned toward the light coming through the bars. Then perhaps, Father, sin is the only language the powerful understand. He looked at me for a long time before replying, You think God will understand you? If he's just, I said, he must. The weeks blurred. My hair began to gray. The guards stopped meeting my eyes. Even they had begun to fear the quiet woman who smiled too calmly before her hanging. One night before dawn, I heard singing from the street outside. The voices of freed men and women gathered under the prison wall. No torches, no protest, just a hymn carried by wind. Let my people go. I pressed my hands to the stone, felt the vibrations of their song against my palms, and for the first time in years, my eyes burned. Not from regret, but recognition. They were my confession, sung back to me. 6 weeks I waited. 6 weeks of silence and songs and memories that refused to die. When the jailer finally came for me at sunrise, I rose, brushed the dust from my dress, and said, Tell them the cage is open. Anchor, July 1853, the gallows wait. The city holds its breath. Question. Would you repent if history called you evil, but the freed called you mother? At dawn on July 15, 1853, they led me into the courtyard of parish prison. The sky was the color of wet ash, and a crowd of more than 3,000 had gathered. The wealthy came in carriages. The poor stood on crates to see better. Some came to mourn. Most came to stare. The sheriff read the sentence aloud, words that sounded like scripture and thunder all at once. Delilah Chevalier, you are hereby condemned to hang by the neck until dead. I stood straight. No trembling, no prayer. I'd already confessed to God in the only language I knew. Action. When they asked for my final words, I lifted my eyes to the crowd. "I was born property," I said, my voice steady enough to carry across the square. "And I will die a person. 7 men are dead because they believed a woman like me could never be free. But 125 live because I proved them wrong." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some crossed themselves, others spat at the dirt. But behind the rows of bonnets and hats I saw them, the ones who had come for something else. Brown faces, scarred hands, eyes glistening like wet iron. The ones I had bought from bondage with blood money. "You call me a monster," I continued, "and maybe I am. But I am the monster you created. The one your chains built, your laws fed, your silence nurtured. If my sin is freedom, then I'll wear it like a crown." The priest tried to hush me, but it was too late. The crowd had gone silent, the kind of silence that means history is listening. When the hood came down, I didn't pray. I thought of my mother's face in the sugar fields. I thought of Pierre's first blow, of Marie Laveau's candles, of every key I'd turned in invisible locks. The lever dropped. The rope caught. The world went white. They said the bells of St. Louis Cathedral rang on their own that morning. They said the air smelled like burnt sugar. The newspapers called me the poisonous quadroon. They told the city I died defiant, unrepentant, unholy. But stories, like ghosts, have ways of escaping their cages. Weeks later, whispers spread through New Orleans that Marie Laveau had been seen walking to the courthouse steps at midnight. She carried a lantern and a list, the names of those 125 souls I had freed. She placed it beneath the gallows beam and lit a single candle. "Paid in full," she whispered. "Those I freed carried the story north, through riverboats, through swamps, through secret codes and songs. In taverns and prayer houses, they told it not as tragedy, but as warning. A woman once turned the master's tools against him, and for that, she burned the system that built her. Years passed. The war came. 40 of the men whose freedom had been purchased with my money fought for the Union. Some died with my name carved into the inside of their rifles. The rest lived to tell their children that freedom is never given. It is taken, one act of defiance at a time. Decades later, a small plaque appeared in the New Orleans courthouse, nailed crookedly by hands that had been slaves. Read, Delilah Chevalier, 7. Deaths, 125 freedoms. She turned sin into salvation. Father Dominique, old and trembling, spoke at the dedication. She was neither saint nor demon, he said. She was a mirror. And when we looked at her, we saw what this city truly was. Even now, some say on hot summer nights, the scent of oleander drifts through the quarter. Doors creak when no wind blows. A whisper trails behind it, soft as breath. Count the graves, then count the freed. I am not forgotten. I am not forgiven. But I am free. Beyond the grave, her voice lingers like smoke. Was she monster or martyr? Tell us in the comments. And subscribe for the next hidden truth.